Hi, everyone. My name is Will Morse. I'm the InMotion marketing specialist for InMotion US. I'd like to welcome to the session. Uh, Today, we are pleased to remember that this session is also being recorded and will be available to watch on demand. If you have any questions during the session, please add them to the Q&A that you can see on the right side of your screen. Note that your questions will be sent privately, and with that, I would like to introduce our speaker, uh, Benny Forsman, business development for Zappy Group, and he will be talking about taking the next steps in electrification journey of off-highway mobile machinery. Take it away, Benny.
Right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I'm currently located in a small hotel room in southern Germany on a trip. So I held a presentation last year looking at electrification of mobile machinery. And with everything that's going on in the world, I was being asked to kind of present the same presentation again, but maybe with a little bit of hindsight about, okay, what has happened since the last time? And was I right or was I wrong? We'll find out. So this one I won't talk too much about, but obviously we are at the point where the off-highway machinery is moving from the innovation stage to adoption. And it's due to technical reasons, there's regulations, there's a better cost of ownership, and this is fueling this technical revolution. So also last year, I did have this little slide to tell us, okay, so where are we in the EV adoption in this space? And I think it's important to remember that industrial vehicles, some of them, electric or forklifts, work platforms, there are a whole lot of machines where the electric systems are already adopted. It's mainstream in this market space. We all look at the passenger car space, the automotive space. We see a lot of EV hype, but it's still early. It's still rocky, and it's still in this gaining momentum space. And then in the off-highway space, when we look at all kinds of machinery, we are even earlier. This is still early adoption. It's still innovation going on. It's still something new, something uncertain that the users are wondering, can this really work for me or not? So we have this wide range of adoption and maturity in this space that we're trying to synthesize into one kind of answer. Another way of showing this is saying, well, we have seen adoption in the light electric vehicle space. This is quite straightforward today, and even I have an all-electric riding lawnmower, despite the fact that I'm cheap. but I just like it better than the gas-powered ones. We are currently in the midst of this next generation, the slightly larger, mid-sized machinery. And there's been some rockiness. Everything that's going on in the world, the economy is kind of uncertain. And there's been peaks and valleys in demand for these kind of machines. And then whether the crystal ball is correct or not, of course, we will see. But in this coming type of 5-year horizon, there's quite a lot going on in this large equipment space that I think we'll see a lot more electric conversion happening. If it is by what kind of percentage there is by 2030, I don't think any one of us know. The one thing I think we all can say for sure is if we look today at 2026 and we look into the future at 2035, the one thing that is fairly certain is that percentage of conversion is going to be significantly higher than what it is today. And despite all this progress in electrification, we all know that there are still obstacles. There's still, for the most part, a higher initial equipment cost. One big part is still that the battery is a fairly expensive piece of equipment. The other one can be charging limitations, whether it's a limitation by time for when I can charge, or there is a physical limitation around where I can charge. This can still be an issue for end users. One piece here is about the component ecosystem. Or is everything available for building these vehicles? Are there still components kind of missing or not rightly sized or not rightly developed? There are gaps out there in certain areas. And someone had done the slide, so I will not take responsibility. I don't understand this last one. Workforce transformation. If someone has a good idea, please shoot me a note and tell me what that meant. I really don't know. So a few additional hurdles that I think we have to be acknowledging. I mean, the battery technology has come a long, long way. But are we fully sure that we are there? At least there's questions from the end users. Regulatory uncertainty. This can be both in terms of the standards that apply for particular vehicles or the standards that apply to components or other things that may impact the design decisions for the vehicles that you're just not 100% sure about. Is this going to remain this way or will it change? And then, of course, you have this piece about the customer education and the perception management. How do how do you make people comfortable with an electric machine when they have been using an IC-powered one their entire life? I think last time when I was doing my presentation, I brought up saying I'm not a Tesla fan myself, but I'm very fond of how they were managing to change the perception of a lot of people, because the electric cars went from being tiny and sort of ridiculous looking little things to being sleek and desirable and expensive. And I think even my own perspectives have changed a little bit over these last few years, where if it is for garden equipment or tools or something, I now perceive the electric option as a premium one. I know it will work when I need it. I don't need to worry about the maintenance and the hassle. It's quieter, it's smoother, it's in many ways even more have better performance and is more productive than me. So we are slowly changing our minds, but it's still something that's there. I did a little study on the EV adoption from the material handling space, because that's really where we have some long-term market data. And I was also, the last time I was using this little comment, the Amara's law, we overestimate the impact of technology in the short term and underestimate the effect in the long run. Then this time I was thinking a little bit, okay, what does this really mean? And this is where I really need to read from a piece of paper, because I looked it up online. So, okay, what does this mean? And it says, well, the law highlights the common human bias. Initial excitement about a new technology often leads to inflated short-term expectations, while the long-term transformative potential is frequently overlooked. And I really think that that is what we see in this electric machinery space, where a lot of people have really high expectations for really fast conversion. And maybe that's not really happening, but over time, what has happened in looking at this material handling space. So the comparison here is for the sit-down counterbalance forklifts, and just looking at the share of electric machines versus the share of machines with an internal combustion engine. And if we look back, I picked the year 2013, which is not so horribly long time ago. Even I remember when that was. And you could see that for Europe, it was a little bit less than half of the forklifts that were electric. For the Americas, it was 27%, and in Asia, it was just 18%. So there was a lot of room to grow the electric share. 10 years later, 2023, you could see that all of these markets had increased a lot. Americas still unsure about this thing, so only grown from 27 to 33. But for Europe, now 2/3 of the counterbalance forklifts were electric. But then I thought that it was interesting that just in one single year, from 23 to 24, Europe was already at this mainstream adoption curve. It wasn't growing that fast anymore. But for Americas, it was growing from 33% to 39% in one single year. So you had as much conversion in a single year as it took 10 years earlier. And Asia continued to grow to 35. So now, again, looking at, okay, one more year, but a year where there's been a lot of uncertainty, going out to the ConExpo show in Las Vegas, suddenly the manufacturers weren't promoting electric in the same way. There weren't any more of these big green signs, and the hype was kind of gone. But looking at this market, all right, it still grows, the share of electrics. Europe suddenly kicked up from 66 to 71. Americas still grew 39 to 40. I had kind of expected that this was actually going down again after this little hype, but no, it sits there. And look at Asia. Suddenly electrification in Asia has passed electrification in the Americas. So there's definitely, and the effects of this, I thought, was also kind of interesting for the manufacturers, because what has happened in these since 2013 is that the global market has doubled in terms of forklifts, but the IC forklift sales has only increased 14%. So almost all of this new growth comes from these electric machines that have grown 140% since that time. So why is that? Well, I mentioned operating costs. I mentioned the maintenance and uptime. I know I had one large fleet owner, one of the largest in the US, and he was once talking about his electric forklift, saying that for the IC powered ones, he would always have to have 15 to 20% more vehicles than he needed, because that was how many that was always out of use for one reason or another. And his quote was, "But for the electrics, I only change the seat covers every few years." Maybe an exaggeration, but at least the user input. The operator comfort is also an important factor. It's quieter, it's smoother, it's not smelly. So that's also. And then I had one little bar about that California Air Resources Board had implemented this ban for internal combustion forklifts from 2026. Well, that thing has paused. They decided that now was not the time to fight the losing battle on that one. But we still see this increase in the conversion. And as I mentioned before, you still have the hurdles. They are more expensive up front, and you do have to have a charging infrastructure. That was sort of the historical background, and then this presentation did go into a bit of the do's and don'ts of electrification. And also here I was then sort of challenged to think about, okay, a year later when there is a lot less pressure, has that changed what the OEMs should think about when electrifying a machine? So let's look at what we said. We said that a number of important things here is have a plan, engage suppliers early. And I will jump into each one of these bullets a little bit more deeper here next. So maybe I'll just jump into those ones instead of reading the headlines here. Let's see what they all say. Have a plan. And from my perspective, I really think that the successful projects are the ones where the manufacturers have a plan that goes beyond just make the machine electric. Think about who is going to buy it. How are they going to use it? How will they charge it? Should there be any specific advantages on the electric machine? What you can do with it now that you have the electric system on it? Do you understand well enough what the customers are willing to pay? And maybe the most important question, why are we electrifying in the first place? Don't do this thing of electrify for the sake of electrification. And I had a little comment at the bottom saying, I know you don't do this, but I can assure you that your competitors are falling in this trap. We don't know, but management has decided that we should do an electric machine. That's a good way of failing with the execution. This one here, of course, I have a bit of a sales hat because this is something that we really want from our side. But please engage with suppliers before finalizing specifications. Engage with the suppliers early and often and find out what is available, readily available in the market that I can use for this machine. And when you do that, consider scalability and longevity for the success of the machine in the long run. We really get nervous when we see manufacturers that are really designing in a silo. The first one seems kind of odd, but it's so true. We have hired an expert who has written a specification, and they may be experts on the component or maybe experts one way or another, but when the entire specification gets written for a target that is different than the target for the machine, it can really lead to wrong design decisions. We do see cases with customers that end up with specifications for components that are really unavailable. Not only unavailable for us, but as far as we know, unavailable in the market. Or they are not really practically manufacturable. And more as a side note, but the most common mistake that people will do is really having unrealistic expectations for performance relating to the space claim. I think it was no more than 2 weeks ago that I had just that a very short specification, but it was clear what the customer needed performance-wise. And then you look at the available space claim, and you can just say that if you are to hit that space claim, it's going to be incredibly expensive for you, because physically you're not going to get that much torque and power out of that available space. So have a reasonable expectation for what you need. Just a general advice is really around aiming for system optimization and not necessarily component optimization. So try to optimize for what battery you can fit here. And then also optimize what the motor needs and the motor controller needs and what the charger can do. When all these things work in a system together and they're all appropriately sized, that's when you get the best results. Size for the battery DC current capacity in real use. And unfortunately, we're still there where that can be quite different from data sheet information. How much power can you actually use from the battery pack? And that is the starting point for all the other component sizing. And then optimize the motor and controller together. Here, I would say it's fairly common to see motor optimization that has started, but where the motor itself requires a lot more current than what it really should need. So now you end up having to oversize the controller, basically because you had the wrong winding. And then also don't forget the need for proper motor tuning. It's not just to connect the motor and the motor controller. There's a lot of performance that can be lost just by not tuning them properly. So don't design around one component. I found this great electric motor, but if it doesn't work well in the system, that didn't do you any good. One piece was talking about onboard versus offboard charging. And I think my thinking is, well, I think the best approach is when you can do both. The charger is best sized based on the available connections. What connections do you actually have for charging this machine? And for the most part, offboard chargers will allow for a lot faster charging times when they are available, but it is pretty convenient to have onboard charger for opportunity charging. And my advice, don't do this. Select a charger that doesn't work. Look for a charging solution that fits the environment of the vehicle. Weigh cost versus performance, and this may sound a little bit odd coming from me with my sales hat on. Would I like to sell as expensive components as I can? Well, maybe, but there are, in reality, it's kind of an important factor for the vehicle. So the trade-offs are important. Try to understand the drivers of the buying decisions in your market for your type of vehicle. And don't assume that performance outweighs cost. Okay, we want to sell a high-end premium machine at high price, high margins. But if that's not what the market really wants, and I would say from my perspective and my experience when hearing about why a particular machine didn't meet the projected sales numbers, why it wasn't really much of a success in the market space, I would say that too expensive is a lot more common reason than not good enough. And obviously, in the end, no one wins if the machine doesn't sell. So even if we would end up overselling you a larger or more higher performance, more expensive product than what you actually needed, if the machine doesn't sell, that was still not a win for us, right? Putting my sales hat on, and you have to excuse me for doing it. I mean, of course, I can't completely avoid doing that, but try to select long-term partners. Focus on finding an established supplier that you can have as a partner through this entire development phase. Does this supplier have the resources and experience to help you with the right solutions? And I was probably not so wrong on that one, saying construction equipment market and venture capital funded suppliers may not necessarily be a match made in heaven. Will this supplier exist in 10 years' time? And will the generation of products that you selected exist in 10 years' time? We have seen quite a few of those things starting to play out in the market where players that were relying on investment funding have had to significantly scale back or even gone belly up. And we have cases that have hurt also us, suddenly this battery supplier is no more. And now I had a custom built battery pack that specifically fit my machine, and I can't get those batteries anymore. I'm back to square one. So don't treat components as a commodity. Find a partner you can work with. And that was where I had a little bit of a bragging alert, saying that for the US market, for the Zappi Group, our top 4 customers in the market has all been with us for a long time. And I don't think that's a coincidence. So, and we have these key takeaways, and I'm probably repeating it a bit too often. Think it through. Spend the time planning, understanding what you need and what the vehicle should do. Consider the whole system. No components work in a silo. They all work together. And from my perspective, the importance, leverage the mature ecosystems. Try to find the cost-effective and well-tried and tested components that doesn't leave you halfway through the development project with something that didn't quite work. Choose the right part. So, looking back at this question that I was being asked, how do we see this in this perspective of going from hype to reality? Has this changed from here, where everyone was rushing to get the vehicle on the market, to where it's a little bit, okay, let's take another year to think about what we're doing here? Are we really I think for the most part it still sits quite well with this information, right? I don't think that the reality is dramatically different from the hype years. I just think that it takes a little bit longer to get there, and it takes a little bit more thinking about, okay, so when I am doing this development of this new electric machine, what am I bringing to the market beyond just that it's electric? How can I add value to the end user? And why should they select the electric machine instead of the regular IC-powered machine? And I still thought that if we go back to ConExpo, walking around and listening to conversations at the exhibitors, the thing was that even though it wasn't advertised as much, you didn't have the big banners, you didn't have the spotlights in the same way on the electric machines. I still have the feedback that the ones who were displaying electric machines had a lot of real positive interest, and that the customers who are buying these machines were probably coming in with, or seem to be coming in with, a more realistic expectation this year compared to what they did 3 years ago. They were, from what I heard, more discussing, well, I would use this machine in this way. I would use it for these particular tasks, for these sites, instead of the, I'm just interested in electric machines. How can I replace everything that I have? So I think that the market has matured, but it has matured in a good way. And I think that the runway is still looking very good for electrification. So, putting my sales hat on again, please come and talk to us. We will be very happy to interact and see what we can do to try to make your vehicles a success. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Benny, for that good presentation. Now we'll see if we have some questions here. Let's see. For OEMs, what do you think is the next big target in, say, the construction space? What type of vehicles, in your opinion, for full electrification?
Mm, I mean, I'm not sure if it's right to call it the next one, because it is already electrifying rapidly. But one of the most ideal electric applications that I know of are these terminal tractors, yard hostlers, that are operating in a defined area. So, charging is really not a problem. Um, you typically have plenty of them in a fairly localized space. So the lack of the noise and emissions and so on is a great improvement. And they also have this big benefit of the low end torque for moving the trailers, and the controllability for the operators to go. I think everything about that market kind of tells that the electric machines are very, how to say, I struggle to see anything where they are not better. They are better than the IC powered machines for really all aspects.
Gotcha. Thank you.
If you wanted one example.
All right. Let's see what else. When it comes to battery technology, a lot of manufacturers are looking at lithium, but now they added newer technology of sodium ion batteries. What do you feel about that?
I will say that I think that we are still far from um, we are still far from being at the final solution on the battery technologies, which um, makes it a little bit dicey for the vehicle manufacturers, because what do you do? Do I sit back and wait for the optimal solution to be available? Um, I'm not sure that you can do that, because if you do that, you're risk to be so far behind the eight ball when you finally get there that you can't catch back up. You probably have to pick. I think I was mentioning that previously, saying try to leverage readily available, tried and tested offerings today. It may not be the absolutely optimal component for 10 years into the future, but it may be something that gets you those 10 years. And you have the learnings and the experience and the market position. So when the next big step is there from a battery technology and so on, you can capitalize on it. Maybe a vague, unnecessarily vague answer. Maybe I didn't dare to say, oh, this is where batteries are going. But I don't have that crystal ball.
Thank you. Let's see. Here we have. Do you think high voltage, greater than 100 volts applications are growing in the USA, or are we?
Well, yes, because if we look back at that slide where we talked about different types of vehicles and their different time scale. The largest vehicles are still really on the upswing. And I mean, from a practical perspective, um, if you're going 100 kilowatt and upwards, it has to be high voltage because there's just too much current. If you're doing 50 kilowatts, yeah, maybe low voltage is easier and cheaper and still gets you all the performance you want. But high voltage, absolutely. But I think it's power related. I think it's one example where, yes, it's really nice to go high voltage even for small applications, but it's just that it costs you too much to do it.
Oh man. Let's see. Any other questions here? Let's see. What do you think about hybrid technology in the U.S. and going forward?
Oh, I love hybrids. Really. I think it's a really good, and people are sort of, well, but it's just a bridge. And maybe that is so, but it's a really good bridge. The ability to downsize the engines, the ability to run at the engines at a lower RPM where they are less noisy, they consume less fuel because you have that instant torque immediately available. I think that is probably the most under explored market segment, perhaps, or definitely way more so than full electric. I'm really sort of intrigued about what can you do at that kind of space. One of my favorite applications absolutely is the company that has made this hybrid wood chipper, going down all the way down to a little 24.9 horsepower engine and a large electric machine with instant torque. So when you feed, it never bogs down. Now, I love that kind of innovation.
Oh yeah, definitely is a nice bridge with that torque.
I think so. Yeah.
All right, I think that's all the questions we have. Is there anything
That
else
will have
you'd
to
like to
be
add?
my topic for next year's
Oh
conference
yeah,
to okay.
I'd like to sit in on that.
be passionate about hybridization.
Well, thank you, Benny. This has been a great session. For everybody watching, this will also has been recorded, and we will share it at a later date. Have a good one.